14. The moral of the story is even future world champions lose things and people, but they find things too, like sand in their shorts. I ate half my sandwich on the way home, saved the other half for dinner, tucked in my backpack, then moved slowly just in case anybody else was outside that needed to see me. Lollygagged and window shopped windows I'd shopped my whole life. Like the thrift store and the liquor store and the ground level apartments bold enough to keep their curtains open. I walked by them all waiting on a head nod or something, and got nothing until I saw Miss Loretta, Mario's mom, standing at the bus stop at the top of my block, out of her mind, pretending to shoot a basketball into a trash bin. Other than that, the version of her I got in church, which was pretty much this, but with a dress on and an organ playing. This was how she always was. How she was when Mario had to pick her up off the ground and take her home. How she was when he would push her away from the barber shop and tell her she had to buy from somewhere else. I don't remember her not being like this, but I bet before she was as cool as her kid. She yelled, "Pass me the ball, Jordan!" And I underhanded the paper ball made from the napkin I'd used to wipe mustard from my mouth, and she shot it long distance. "Swish!" she shouted, throwing her hands up. "Swish!" I yelled back, and we cheered for a few seconds. I wasn't sure if she knew she'd missed the shot, and it ain't matter. She made it in her mind, was making it too. Once I got in the apartment, I breezed through my homework. Well, most of my homework. I didn't breeze through science because Miss Schwartz gave us a worksheet with the outline of a frog on it and told us to label all the organs. And it wasn't that I didn't know or couldn't flip through my book to figure out which organs were which, but it was because the diagram was drawn bad. If Mrs. Tannerbaum had drawn it, or if I would have drawn it, or even if Quentin had drawn it, it would have been much better, making the assignment easier to complete. But when the liver looks like the lungs, it gets tricky. Once I figured all that out, which took way longer than I expected. I closed my books, ate the other half of my sandwich, showered, and put on my sleep clothes, shorts and a tank top for bed. A day of me looking that good, plus with all them ups and downs, had no choice but be an exhausting one. But the sneakers still had to be cleaned. After going through the step by step, almost stabbing myself with a toothpick, I put them back on. Yes, I slid my feet back in them with my sleep clothes on and everything because nobody was there to stop me, which was also the reason I went to bed so early, so Ma wouldn't get there in time to do so. But I needed to test my newest theory about the charge up. Turns out the squeak didn't work, so then I thought maybe since I get more energy when I sleep, the Jordans need to sleep how I do, on my feet, in the bed. If that ain't work, I wouldn't try again. They'd just be shoes I wear for my fly, but not to fly in. I don't know what did it, what woke me, if it was a physical feeling or a mental one, or maybe it was something happening in my dream that I can't remember, or maybe I wasn't dreaming and that's what did it. A dreamless night makes for a much lighter sleep. Either way, whatever it was, I woke up. I couldn't tell what was happening, but as I opened my eyes and looked, really looked, I noticed someone at the edge of my bed. I figured maybe it was a dream. I have them all the time and a lot of them. I know their dreams while I'm dreaming them. It's like I told my mom, I know how to make myself dream, how to go looking for them, how to turn on my brain TV. But I hadn't been thinking about a shadow. To me, that sounds more like a nightmare. Whoever was there was wrestling with my shoes. "Hello?" I said, sitting up some, my eyes adjusting to the dark. "Wait, what? Dad? Is that you?" He got the second sneaker off, gazed at me just long enough for me to catch a glimpse of the white of his eyes in the dark. "Yeah, son, it's me," he said, setting the sneakers on the floor. I figured he came in to check on me and knew if Ma had caught me with the sneakers on, this would have become a much longer night for me, one without sleep. Because having shoes on in a shoes off house is one thing, but having shoes on in bed is a whole other thing. And even though I knew I was pushing it and it was totally worth the risk, Dad was there to save me and himself from another long conversation about how these sneakers were going to ruin our whole family, which of course wasn't true, but she would have taken it there. She probably would have figured out where Michael Jordan lives and delivered them personally back to him with a threat like, "My son don't need no air. He need A's," or something mom slick like that. "Go back to sleep," Dad whispered before leaving the room. I rubbed my feet against one another, cracked my toes, and did just that. The next morning, I rolled over, hung myself off the side of the bed to catch a glimpse of my sneakers, hung a little more because I didn't see them at first, or at second. I hung even more, now falling out of bed, the floor greeting me with a not so good morning, because wooden kisses ain't soft, and my shoes had disappeared. But I saw him put them down. I think I did. I saw him. He took them off my feet and set them on the floor. That's what he did. I'm pretty sure that's what I saw. But it was late and dark. But still, I saw him. I saw him. I got up off the floor, but not before checking under the bed, then ran into the kitchen and found my mother sitting at the table having coffee, gazing out the window. "Ma?" She turned to me, tired tattooed on her skin. "Morning." "Good morning." She turned back to the window. "Where's Dad?" Ma turned to me again, sighed. "I don't know." "Did he put my shoes in the safe?" I asked. "He doesn't know the code to the safe, Odie," she said, and I would have thought it was a throwaway if her face didn't seem to spark up a bit. "So then, where my shoes at?" I asked. She looked down as if she was wearing them. She wasn't. "Oh, God." She dropped her head, pressed her hands to her face. "What?" "Nothing." She swiped her hands down as if putting on a mask. And I'm not worried mask. I'd seen it before. If it was a real mask, it'd be cheap and cracked. "I don't know where your shoes are." "Well then, why you look like that?" "I don't look like nothing," she said, hopping up from the table to pour herself more coffee. "Want some?" It was the first time she'd offered me coffee. "No, that stuff's gross," I replied, skeptical. "I just figured your daddy gave you a sip of beer. I could give you a sip of coffee." "Another sign that you growing up." She returned to her chair. "Yeah, you growing up," she mumbled, and there was something sad about the way she said it. "I just want my sneakers." I opened the fridge, stared at the grape juice container, at the corners of it, imagining where my father might have taken them. "You know, I bet he's gone to see if he can get the creases taken out." I closed the refrigerator, but didn't take the juice out, or the milk, because I didn't have an appetite. "I hope so." My mother nodded, her cheap mask now flashing a painted-on smile. She hoped so? She hoped so? Why didn't she know where he was? Any other time she did. She slept next to him every night, woke up next to him every morning. They talked about everything, even if it meant talking loud. So how could she hope and not know? But before I could dig more, she told me to go get ready for school. And I did. But what I couldn't get ready for was how school would feel different with this strange lump in my throat. Where was he? It would also feel different without the other piece to my persona. I was back to just regular Odie overnight, a kid with a decent haircut, a half-peeled scab above his faded eyebrows, and a pair of dirty Converses. I stayed a little quiet, moved with a little less bigness and tired, and tried to just make it through without bumping into Quentin, who I knew would figure out a way to comment on something. And even though I almost made it, there was, of course, no escaping him. He found me at my locker at the end of the day the way stink finds a nose. "Hey, Odie, you wore them Jordans for 2 days and that's what your feet did to them? You should chuck those in the trash." Then after that, you should throw yourself in the trash with him. Now, in this moment, I could feel it. I could feel all that I'd been trying to keep away from me, all that I'd been trying to avoid running right up my spine. I straightened my back, clenched my jaw, fisted my hands, then relaxed them. But Quentin ain't nowhere to stop. Then, after that, I'm gonna take you down to the dump. But before I do, I'm gonna tell your mother to stop calling me. For real. She be calling my house trying to sell me stuff. I only know it's her because, well, don't worry about how I know it's her. Just know I know. And as an exclamation point, he kissed the air. That was it. I grabbed him by his shirt, threw him into the locker, slammed him against it once. That was for his jokes. Then slammed him against it again. That was for the man who almost broke my father's nose and made my mother scared to go to the barber shop, which is why Quentin cracked those jokes in the first place. And a third time, for something I could feel but couldn't put my finger on, that lump in my throat before I felt someone on my shoulder pulling me back. Thankfully, it wasn't a teacher. It was Tori. Yo, snap out of it, he said, shaking me. Count to 9. Count to 9, Odie. Turns out Tori did have 8th grade strength. Who knew? He keep talking like everything's a joke. I fumed, tears tight roping on my eyelids. Tori pulling me down the hall. But everything ain't for playing with. Everything ain't funny. After school, when we got to the park, my father didn't show up to practice. Coach asked me if I'd heard from him. Nah, not since last night. The lump grew into a stone I could barely swallow. Too much worry in the windpipe. Oh, okay. The start of a frown flitted across Coach's face but disappeared just a quick. Well, I'll reach out to him. He couldn't have had to go back out of town already. Could he? I asked. But I knew that didn't really make sense because Ma would have known. I don't know, Odie. Maybe, but he would have told you, right? Yeah, I said, yanking the laces of my old faithful track shoes. They were red and flimsy, but were better than running in Chucks. Practice went the way it normally did. Stretches, warm-ups, the usual. Then because it was Wednesday, we were running drills, straights and curves, which is when we run fast on the straight and ease off on the curves. We also did butt kicks and high knees and skips to work on form. And while the rest of the team got to work, Coach took me over to the sand pit to focus on the thing I now was regretting I'd never asked for. Still, I did the jump exercises, worked on the techniques, and even though the fundamentals made sense, none of it felt the same without my sneakers. What's with the attitude? Coach said at last, pausing the drills. He could see I was having a hard time. I don't know, I just feel weird. What you feeling weird about? I just don't, you know, I tried to find the words. I felt better when I had on my Jordans. Your Jordans? Coach said it like he was disappointed in me or something, like he felt how the barber felt about MJ not deserving sneakers or me not deserving them. You want to just focus on sprinting today? Tori can always use a partner to push him. I shrugged, and this was when Coach went off. Let me get this straight. You think them shoes are really gonna do something for you? And before I could answer, he kept going. You think Michael Jordan wasn't Michael Jordan before he had them shoes? I don't know. I looked down at my red feet, suddenly seeming a lot like clown shoes. Nike gave him that sneaker deal because he was already doing all that, right? He was already jumping and gliding. That's how he got the shoe. If it was the other way around, they would pick the sorriest person on the team and give them the flying shoes. I gaped at him. Hadn't thought about it that way. And do you think that if Carl Lewis actually showed up here and took off his shoes, you could beat him in a race? Now I looked at Coach like he'd grown a third foot. Can nobody beat Carl Lewis, coach? He could have on my mother's house slippers and we'd all still get smoked. Exactly. So maybe the shoes are magic because of the person, your steps, your work that makes the shoes go. So, whether you got on Jordans or not, you can still make the long jump. You can jump from here to the rest of your life if you just pay attention to your steps, your timing. Right, like we practiced the other day, I said. The the penitentiary, the penultimate. Yeah, that thing. Second to last step before liftoff. So I followed through with practice and learned about takeoff faults, which is when your foot crosses over or even touches the takeoff line. I learned that in a meet I'd have 3 chances to jump as far as possible, which I was happy to hear. I even learned that the best way to land in the sand is to land on your butt, which I'd seen in the videos of Carl Lewis and watched coach demonstrate. I always figured it was just because they were jumping so hard and so far that was just how they were landing, but it was actually technique, all but no hands, because that way it's measured because the way it's measured is by the distance from the line to wherever there's a break in the sand. So if you put your hands back to brace yourself after landing, they count where your hands are, not where your butt is. But butt landing took some getting used to. Sand on me, up my back, all over the backs of my legs. Sometimes, when you get too high and you go too far, the only way to land is on your butt, coach said, walking me back to the line. Ain't no graceful way down. With each jump, I could tell that lump in my throat got smaller and smaller. My worries washed down by me concentrating on making sure I was timing my jump just right to lift into the air. That was the hardest part, but the part I loved the most because it was different than how I usually thought about time on the track. Usually it was about getting my fastest time, but with this, it was about making sure I was exactly where I needed to be at the exact right time to fly. Remind me of Back to the Future when Marty and Doc test out the DeLorean for the first time. They have to get it to the right speed, 88 miles per hour, in order for it to jump dimensions. But if they time it wrong, they basically get run over. You have to see if you haven't, but I know you have. The point is because I became the point is I became obsessed with making sure I got my foot as close to the takeoff line as possible, and after a while, without even me noticing, I wasn't too worried about that either. I was just doing it. Not great, but doing it. Jumping about 2 meters, landing on my butt, then springing up to see if I faulted. And if I didn't, then I checked to see the mark I left in the sand to see how far I'd come.